To the campaign here in Alberta, where voting is set to begin tomorrow across the province. Massive advanced polling, almost 700,000 votes have already been cast, underlines this as an election of intense interest to Albertans. At issue are an alien economy and the need for pipelines to connect oil sands production to the West Coast. A poll by Nanos Research shows the two major parties are 8 points apart, with the UCP in the lead, although there's only a 3-point preference for Kenney over Notley. Watching closely from City Hall is someone with a vested interest in getting a premier he can work with to cure an ailing economy. Calgary Mayor Nenshi joins me from City Hall. Mayor Nenshi, the Flames are doing a lot better than the economy these days. We hear a lot about the 130,000 layoffs, the hemorrhaging potential for an energy sector that's still a powerful force for Canada. What are the stakes for Calgary and other cities in this election to turn this around?
Well, yeah, as you say, Don, we're kind of concerned with a different kind of power play today. Sorry, game three, but it is important for us to think about what those stakes are, not just for Calgary, but for the country. You know, Calgary has long been the economic engine of the nation. And as you say, our unemployment rate here is now the highest in the country of any big city. Our downtown vacancy rate means that nearly 1 in 4 buildings downtown are empty, and there's a bunch of attendant problems that come with that. So one of the things that I did, as I've done in many previous campaigns, I've had 5, Premier Notley is my 5th premier since I've been mayor, if you can believe it. But we surveyed all of the candidates really extensively on issues that were important to the city. We published those results verbatim at yycmatters.ca. There's some good news in there. The good news is people are committed to the infrastructure projects we need in Calgary. There's bad news in there. Nobody knows what to do about cannabis or extended producer recycling, responsibility on recycling. But the worst news, in my opinion, is that although in theory this campaign has been about the economy, we haven't really vetted the economic issues of the candidates. We've had lots of bozo eruptions. We've had lots of very troubling things going on around candidates, but we haven't really looked at those economic plans. So let me tell you something. They're not good. None of the parties really seem to have a great plan for what to do to help Calgary and to help Calgary now. And you know, the other thing is, the great truth that we have to tell ourselves is not one of these parties can do one thing to get the Trans Mountain Pipeline built 5 minutes earlier. They can do a lot of things to make it get built later. And so kind of that narrative is one that is frustrating to me, because I think it's masking the real lack of a plan to help those small businesses in Calgary, to help bring jobs back, to help Calgary businesses grow, and to attract new businesses to the city.
But what did you want to hear from these candidates? Give me an example of something you think could have put a booster into the Calgary economy. What specifically were you wanting to hear that you didn't hear?
Sure. I'm looking for all kinds of ideas, because I certainly don't have them all. But I have to say that the city of Calgary is feeling a little bit like we're out on our own here. And we're the order of government with the least ability to pay doing this. So for example, the city of Calgary has put $100 million into a venture fund to attract businesses to Calgary, to sweeten the pot a little bit. Neither the federal nor the provincial governments have been interested in helping out with that, with real economic development. We have a real problem, and it's very mathematical and a bit complicated, but because of the downtown assessment issue, small businesses outside of the downtown are seeing huge increase in their property taxes. And the city's been left to deal with this. We put $150 million in to help these businesses, but here's the ironic thing. 40% of those property taxes go to the province, and the province has been completely absent on this. So I was surprised that none of the parties seem to have any ideas about what to do this or with this, or frankly, any other new ideas to get Calgary back in its rightful place as the economic engine of the country.
Are you worried? We've heard this theory that if Jason Kenney wins tomorrow, and he's going to take on a very hard line stand on eliminating carbon taxing and raising emission levels of the oil sands, that actually that might put the Prime Minister in a box where he cannot green light the Trans Mountain Pipeline, because he made that as part of a grand bargain with Notley to fight climate change. Do you worry that a Kenney government could actually, instead of being a stronger advocate for pipelines, may actually go into the reverse?
You know, I have had many, many, many conversations with the Prime Minister and with the entire federal government about the need to greenlight pipelines. And I got to tell you, it was a journey to get them there. And at one point, the Prime Minister said to me, you know, right now I've got 3 seats in Alberta. If I do all of this, how many seats will I have in Alberta? And I said, maybe 1? And he looked at me and he said, yes, but it's the right thing to do, and it's something we've got to do. And so I feel like regardless of who wins this election, I'm going to have to do a ton of work to make sure that we are still moving forward with these pipelines. But I've certainly heard the theory that you've expressed. Your former Post Media colleague, Don Braid, has written about it in some detail. Because here's the thing. With the carbon tax, the federal government could impose their own carbon tax as they've done in those other 4 provinces. And so if I'm the Prime Minister, I'm probably not worried about that. But that emissions cap on the oil sands, which was agreed to after much negotiation with the oil companies, getting everyone on board, it was part of that grand bargain. And if we have a new government tomorrow that turns off the taps to BC and reduces and gets rid of that emissions cap, if I'm the Prime Minister, it's harder for me to make that commitment that this is the right thing to do, especially in an election year. So I would tread softly on this, but I know I'm going to have to do some work to make sure I'm continuing to make that case.
Yeah, tell me, speaking of that threat to cut off flow of oil and gas to BC, what do you think of that? Is that a neighborly thing to do? Do you think it's necessary, or is this just political rhetoric on hyperbole overkill?
I have been incredibly critical of Premier Horgan. I've said some, frankly, not very nice things about the way he's managed this situation, and I stand by those things. I also understand that thanks to a lot of hard work, even from folks like me going to Vancouver and making the case for the pipelines, that public support in British Columbia for the pipelines is well above 50%, even in Vancouver, and at about 50% on the island. Given that, it doesn't make a ton of sense for me to penalize people who are just trying to go to work or trying to transport goods for something that we're a little bit irritated with their government. And quite frankly, there's nothing on the table at the moment that the Premier of British Columbia is doing to stop the pipeline. So, you know, sometimes you got to keep your powder dry. I was very in favor of this law. I continue to be in favor of this law, but you got to use it at the right moment, not just to use it because it's a helpful thing to say before an election.
Okay, very quickly, if I could, UPC candidates, the ones that are still in the race and some of the ones that left the race, said some fairly incendiary issues about intolerance, homophobia, racial intolerance. Are you worried that this is going to be built in if the Jason Kenney government is elected tomorrow?
I'm not worried that it's going to be built into the government. I have no evidence whatsoever that Jason Kenney feels that way. But I'm going to tell you a quick story, Don. I met a woman a couple weeks ago, a 98-year-old woman called Marta Cohn. She's 4'0", and she was a Jewish French resistance spy in the Second World War. And I was giving her a white hat, as mayors of Calgary do, and she interrupted me when I said, "Thank you for the work you do." And she said, "I can't stop what I'm doing because the world today is 1935. It's exactly 1935, and I know the next chapter." So I'm 98 years old, but I can't stop. And we can't stop. This stuff is terrifying. In 2012, the election in Alberta turned because of one homophobic comment. One. And there have been some 25 candidates who have made hateful comments, mostly, not entirely, mostly in the UCP, but spread across. And this kind of discussion, this kind of debate, this kind of what's going on with our society, it troubles me greatly. And we have to do something about it. And it's important that people, you know, people are saying, well, I'm going to plug my nose and vote about the economy and not listen to this stuff. But ignoring this stuff means you're complicit in this stuff. And if you believe that every human being on this land deserves to be safe and deserves to have opportunity, that's got to be part of our political conversation.
All right. Mayor Nenshi, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on, and go Flames go.
Go Flames go, and everyone get out and vote.